The unseen threat. In the cold expanse of space, where stars twinkle like distant lanterns, the alien scientists of the Goran race huddled in their research station, staring in disbelief at the data displayed before them. The Goran scientists were a highly advanced species known for their mastery of the known laws of physics. Yet now, their world was crumbling as they witnessed an unprecedented phenomenon. Dr. Lyra Voss, the lead scientist, pointed at the screen with trembling fingers. "This human ship," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "is defying everything we know about physics. Its propulsion system, it's as if it's rewriting the fundamental rules." The Goran Council, a group of stern-faced leaders, gathered in their chamber, their expressions a mix of skepticism and concern. Commander Zevin, known for his tactical prowess, glanced at the holographic projection of the human ship. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" he asked, his tone sharp. Dr. Voss's eyes met Zevin's with a look of urgent dread. "The ship is accelerating beyond our comprehension. Its engines emit particles that interact with space-time in ways we've never seen. If it enters our territory, we might not be able to stop it." The Council's leader, High Chancellor Erin, waved a dismissive hand. "The Goran have always been the pinnacle of scientific achievement. How can this primitive species challenge us?" Dr. Voss's frustration flared. "You don't understand. If they continue at this rate, they could reach our homeworld within days. We need to act now before it's too late." High Chancellor Erin sighed, unimpressed. "We have dealt with threats before. We will assess the situation, but I am not convinced that a direct confrontation is necessary." Desperation crept into Dr. Voss's voice. "With all due respect, Chancellor, this is no ordinary threat. Their technology surpasses anything we've ever encountered. If they prove hostile, our civilization could be at risk." Despite the urgency in her voice, the Council remained unmoved. They were confident in their superiority and reluctant to take action based on what they perceived as unsubstantiated fears. With no other options, Dr. Voss made a critical decision. She would bypass the Council's authority and mobilize a task force of Goran warships for a preemptive strike against the human ship, codenamed the Phoenix. The task force was a secret operation, its existence known only to a select few within the Goran military. In the quiet of her lab, Dr. Voss prepared the necessary data and sent an urgent transmission to the warships. Her fingers danced across the console as she issued the order for an immediate launch. The stakes were high, and failure was not an option. As the warships prepared for departure, Dr. Voss watched the data streams with growing anxiety. She knew that the Goran fleet would be facing an adversary unlike any they had encountered before. The Phoenix was not just a ship. It was a harbinger of a new era in space warfare. The countdown to the engagement began. The Goran ships, sleek and menacing, slipped into the cold void of space, their engines glowing with a fierce intensity. Dr. Voss and her team held their breath as the task force approached the coordinates where the Phoenix was last detected. The Goran fleet, armed with the latest in advanced weaponry, was prepared for a decisive confrontation. Little did they know, the true nature of the human ship's capabilities was about to reveal itself in ways they could never have imagined. The Phoenix unleashed. As the Goran fleet emerged from hyperspace, the shimmering void of space stretched out before them. The massive warships, their hulls gleaming under distant starlight, glided silently toward the coordinates where the Phoenix was last reported. The tension on the bridge of the Lid Goran ship, the vortex, was palpable. Dr. Lyra Voss stood beside Commander Zevin, her eyes fixed on the viewport. The human ship was nowhere to be seen. "We should be within visual range shortly," Zevin said, his voice betraying a hint of unease. "Keep your sensors active and be ready for anything." Moments later, the sensors picked up a blip on their screens. The Phoenix appeared as a distant silhouette against the backdrop of the stars. Its sleek black hull was unlike anything the Goran had ever encountered. "There it is," Voss announced, her voice steady despite the storm of anxiety within her. The vortex and the accompanying warships moved into formation, their weapons systems powering up. The Goran fleet was prepared for a standard engagement, but as they drew closer, their confidence began to waver. The Phoenix suddenly accelerated, its speed defying all conventional understanding. "It's moving," Zevin barked. "Deploy the interceptors and prepare to engage." As the Goran ships launched their fighters and locked their weapons on the human vessel, the Phoenix's engines flared with a blinding light. The Goran fleet's initial salvo of energy beams and missiles streaked through space. But to their shock, the attacks seemed to dissipate harmlessly against an invisible shield. Dr. Voss watched in horror as the Phoenix's response came swiftly. Exotic energy weapons, unlike anything the Goran had ever seen, lashed out from the human ship. The energy beams cut through the Goran warships with horrifying precision. Ships that had once been symbols of Goran might now erupted into fireballs, their hulls crumbling under the relentless assault. On the bridge of the vortex, Commander Zevin's face was ashen. "Fall back," he ordered, his voice a mix of rage and despair. "All ships, retreat immediately." The Goran fleet scrambled to withdraw, but the damage was already catastrophic. The once proud warships, now burning and shattered, limped away from the battlefield. The Phoenix pursued briefly, but then halted, allowing the Goran survivors to flee. Dr. Voss's heart raced as she surveyed the aftermath. The Phoenix's technology was beyond their comprehension, its power devastatingly effective. The Goran had been outmatched from the beginning. As the last of the Goran fleet retreated, Dr. Voss sent a transmission to High Chancellor Erin, her hands trembling as she relayed the grim news. "The Phoenix has demonstrated capabilities far exceeding our own. The fleet has been decimated. We must reassess our strategy immediately." The Goran High Council convened in an emergency session. The council chambers were filled with a sense of foreboding as Dr. Voss presented the data and images from the battle. The evidence was undeniable. The Phoenix was a force to be reckoned with. High Chancellor Erin, his face etched with concern, addressed the council. "We underestimated the humans. Their technology has proven to be far more advanced than we anticipated. We must consider our next steps carefully." Dr. Voss spoke up, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "We need to understand their technology and capabilities more thoroughly. The Phoenix's ability to bend space-time could represent a paradigm shift in how we approach space warfare." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. The reality of their predicament was setting in. The Goran, once seen as the apex of technological achievement, were now facing a species that had achieved the impossible. In the meantime, on the bridge of the Phoenix, Captain Jason Skora watched the Goran fleet retreat with a sense of grim satisfaction. He turned to his crew. "Prepare for the next phase of our mission. We've made our point, but there is still much to be done." As the crew of the Phoenix worked diligently, Captain Skora's mind was focused on the ultimate objective: to bring the Goran to the negotiating table and secure their compliance. The confrontation had only been the beginning. The true challenge lay ahead: the unseen hand. In the aftermath of the Goran fleet's catastrophic encounter with the Phoenix, the remnants of their forces regrouped at a hidden asteroid base on the fringes of their territory. The base, a complex web of tunnels and chambers carved into the rock, buzzed with activity as the Goran leaders convened to assess the damage and plot their next move. High Chancellor Erin convened an emergency council meeting, his expression grim as he addressed his top military and scientific advisors. "We have been dealt a severe blow," he began, his voice carrying the weight of the crisis. "Our fleet is decimated, and the technology we've encountered is beyond our wildest imaginations. We must adapt quickly or face complete annihilation." Dr. Lyra Voss stood at the forefront, her face pale but resolute. "The Phoenix's capabilities are unlike anything we've seen. Their ability to manipulate space-time and their advanced defensive systems render our current strategies ineffective." A general named Tarek, a veteran of many battles, spoke up. "If we cannot overcome their technology with conventional means, we must find another approach." Perhaps we should consider a more unconventional strategy. Erin nodded thoughtfully. What do you propose? Tarek leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with determination. We need to gather more intelligence on the Phoenix and its crew. We must discover the key to their technology and find a way to counter it. We should use spies or infiltrators to gather information from within. Dr. Voss interjected. And what about their diplomatic approach? They are not just a military threat, but also a political one. If they force us into submission, the implications for our people will be catastrophic. Erin's gaze hardened. We cannot allow ourselves to be subjugated. We must explore every option. Prepare a covert operation to infiltrate their ranks and uncover their weaknesses. Meanwhile, we need to continue with our research and development. We have to find a way to match their technology. As the meeting concluded, the Goran leadership set their plans into motion. Covert operatives were dispatched to gather intelligence, and scientists worked around the clock to reverse engineer any fragments of technology they could salvage from the battle. On the Phoenix, Captain Jason Skora and his crew were engaged in routine maintenance and upgrades. The human ship's advanced systems were being fine-tuned, and the crew was prepared for the next phase of their mission. Skora's second-in-command, Lieutenant Murrah Quinn, approached him with a datapad. Captain, we've intercepted a transmission from the Goran base. It seems they are planning an operation to gather intelligence on us. They are trying to infiltrate our ranks. Skora's eyes narrowed. They're desperate if they're resorting to espionage. We need to stay vigilant, increase security protocols, and monitor all communications. We cannot afford any surprises. The crew members worked diligently to implement enhanced security measures. Skora was determined to keep their technological edge and maintain the upper hand in the ongoing conflict. Meanwhile, Goran operatives, disguised as traders and diplomats, began infiltrating human-controlled territories. Their goal was to blend in and gather information while avoiding detection. Their efforts were met with mixed success. Some managed to slip through the cracks, while others were caught and interrogated. Back at the Goran base, Dr. Voss analyzed the incoming data. The information we're getting is fragmented but useful. It seems the Phoenix's technology relies heavily on exotic energy sources and advanced space-time manipulation. We need to focus on understanding these aspects. The scientists worked tirelessly, cross-referencing the new data with their own research. A breakthrough came when they discovered a pattern in the energy emissions of the Phoenix. It suggested that the ship's technology was not only advanced, but also highly unstable under certain conditions. Dr. Voss presented her findings to High Chancellor Erin. If we can exploit this instability, we might be able to neutralize their technological advantage. We should focus our efforts on developing countermeasures that exploit these weaknesses. Erin looked impressed. Good work, Dr. Voss. We'll prioritize this research. Meanwhile, we must continue to monitor the Phoenix and be ready for any future engagements. As the Goran's covert operation progressed, the atmosphere in their base remained tense. The threat of human retaliation loomed large, and every action was measured with caution. The Goran knew that their survival depended on their ability to adapt and overcome the unprecedented challenge posed by the Phoenix. In the vast expanse of space, the conflict continued to evolve. The Goran were no longer just facing a powerful enemy. They were up against a force that challenged their understanding of the universe. And as the battle for supremacy unfolded, both sides prepared for the next decisive confrontation. Shadows of defiance. As the Goran forces scrambled to adapt to the technological leap presented by the Phoenix, a new development began to stir discontent within their ranks. The covert operation to gather intelligence had revealed that not all Gorans were willing to accept the new status quo. Among them was a faction led by General Tarek, who had grown increasingly frustrated with the Goran leadership's approach. General Tarek had always been a fierce advocate of military aggression and had little patience for the more cautious strategies adopted by High Chancellor Erin. As the Goran forces regrouped and adapted to their new reality, Tarek saw an opportunity to strike back and reclaim their lost honor. In secret, Tarek began to rally a group of loyalists and disenchanted officers. They gathered in a concealed meeting room on the asteroid base, far from the prying eyes of the Goran High Council. "We cannot sit idly by while our people are subjugated," Tarek declared, his voice resonating with conviction. "We must take decisive action to reclaim our position and assert our dominance." One of his officers, Lieutenant Kira, nodded in agreement. "The High Council's cautious approach has left us vulnerable. We need to act swiftly and decisively. We have the capabilities to challenge the Phoenix and turn the tide in our favor." Tarek outlined his plan to his followers. He intended to seize control of the remaining warships and launch a surprise attack on the Phoenix, hoping to catch the humans off guard and inflict significant damage. The element of surprise was crucial, and Tarek was determined to capitalize on it. Meanwhile, on the Phoenix, Captain Jason Skora and his crew remained on high alert. The intelligence they had gathered indicated that the Goran were preparing for something significant, but the specifics remained unclear. Skora knew that any sign of Goran aggression had to be met with a swift and overwhelming response. Lieutenant Mara Quinn approached Skora with an update. "Captain, our sensors have detected unusual activity near the Goran base. There's an increased energy signature that suggests a buildup of forces." Skora's expression hardened. "Prepare the crew for possible action. We need to be ready for anything. I want a full scan of the Goran base to determine their intentions." As the crew carried out the scans, they confirmed Skora's suspicions. The Goran were indeed mobilizing for a major operation. Skora relayed the information to Admiral Vega, who was coordinating the defense strategies from the command center. "This confirms our worst fears," Admiral Vega said, his voice tense. "The Goran are planning a large-scale offensive. We need to fortify our defenses and prepare for a possible assault." Skora and his team worked tirelessly to reinforce the Phoenix's defensive systems and strategize their response. The ship's advanced technology, combined with the crew's unwavering resolve, was their greatest asset in the upcoming conflict. As Tarek's faction prepared to launch their attack, they faced several challenges. The warships they intended to use were outdated and in need of repairs. The Goran's resources were stretched thin, and the operation required meticulous planning to succeed. Tarek addressed his followers, emphasizing the importance of their mission. "Our time is now. We will strike at the Phoenix and show the humans that we are not to be underestimated. Our victory will restore our honor and secure our future." With everything in place, Tarek and his faction set their plan into motion. The attack was timed to coincide with a period of low vigilance on the Phoenix, maximizing their chances of success. The Goran warships, patched together and reactivated, began their journey toward the human vessel. As the Goran fleet approached the Phoenix, tensions mounted. Skor and his crew were on high alert, anticipating an imminent confrontation. The crew's dedication and preparation were tested as the Goran warships emerged from the shadows, launching their surprise attack. The first wave of Goran ships struck with ferocity, targeting the Phoenix's defensive systems. The battle erupted in a blaze of energy beams and explosions as both sides clashed in the vastness of space. The Phoenix's advanced shields absorbed much of the initial assault, but the intensity of the Goran attack put them to the test. Captain Skora and his crew responded with precision and coordination. Their counterattack was swift and ruthless, aimed at dismantling the Goran assault force. The clash between the two sides was fierce, with each side pushing their technological capabilities to the limit. As the battle raged, the outcome hung in the balance. The Phoenix's advanced technology gave them an edge, but the Goran's determination and tactical ingenuity kept the fight intense. Both sides fought with everything they had, knowing that the stakes were higher than ever. In the midst of the chaos, Tarek's faction faced their own challenges. Despite their initial success, they encountered unexpected resistance and technical difficulties. The battle was not going as smoothly as they had hoped, and their morale began to waver. As the conflict reached its climax, it became clear that the battle was far from over. The Goran and human forces clashed with unparalleled intensity, each side determined to achieve their objectives and secure their future in the galaxy. The tide turns. The battle between the Phoenix and the Goran fleet raged on, with both sides exchanging devastating blows. The Phoenix's advanced technology, combined with the crew's tactical expertise, was proving to be a formidable challenge for General Tarek's forces. However, Tarek's determination and the sheer numbers of his fleet kept the conflict far from decided. Captain Jason Skora paced the command deck of the Phoenix, his eyes locked on the holographic display showing the ongoing battle. Despite the ship's superior technology and the crew's efforts, the Goran were relentless. The intensity of the engagement made it clear that Tarek was not just any opponent. He was a seasoned commander with a deep understanding of military strategy. "Lieutenant Quinn, status report," Skora demanded, his voice firm and focused. "We've sustained damage to our starboard shields, Captain," Quinn replied, her fingers flying over the console. "The Goran are targeting our weaker points. We're holding them off, but we need to reinforce our defenses and counter their attack more effectively." Skora nodded, deep in thought. The Goran had proven to be resilient and adaptable, and their surprise attack had pushed the Phoenix's crew to their limits. He needed to come up with a strategy to turn the tide of battle and ensure the safety of his ship and crew. "Prepare the experimental countermeasures we've been testing," Skora instructed. "If we can disrupt their attack patterns, we might be able to gain the upper hand." Meanwhile, General Tarek was feeling the pressure. The initial success of his attack had been met with fierce resistance. His warships, though numerous, were struggling against the advanced defenses of the Phoenix. Tarek's frustration grew as his forces faced setbacks and technical issues. "Deploy the secondary assault units," Tarek ordered, his voice tinged with frustration. "We need to break through their defenses. Push forward." As the secondary units engaged, the battle escalated. The Phoenix's experimental countermeasures came online, creating disruptions in the Goran attack patterns. Energy pulses and electronic jamming began to interfere with the Goran's targeting systems, giving the Phoenix an advantage. The crew of the Phoenix rallied, using the disruption to their advantage. Skora coordinated a series of precise counterattacks, targeting key Goran ships and weakening their offensive capabilities. The tide of the battle began to shift as the Goran forces found themselves on the defensive. Despite their best efforts, Tarek's forces were unable to regain their momentum. The Goran warships, once a formidable threat, were now facing a series of setbacks. The Phoenix's superior technology and tactical adjustments had given them the upper hand. In the midst of the chaos, a new development emerged. A message was intercepted from a faction within the Goran fleet, one that had been dissatisfied with Tarek's leadership and the ongoing conflict. This faction, led by Admiral Lyra, had grown disillusioned with Tarek's approach and sought to negotiate a ceasefire. Skora reviewed the intercepted message, realizing that there was an opportunity to end the conflict without further bloodshed. He considered the implications of negotiating with the dissenting faction, knowing that it could lead to a resolution that spared lives and avoided further destruction. He turned to Admiral Vega, who had been overseeing the battle from the command center. "Admiral, we've intercepted a message from a faction within the Goran fleet that wants to negotiate. It might be our chance to end this conflict without more bloodshed." Admiral Vega nodded thoughtfully. "If we can broker a ceasefire with Admiral Lyra's faction, it could stabilize the situation. But we need to be cautious. We don't want to end up in a situation where we're negotiating under duress." Skora agreed and decided to initiate contact with Admiral Lyra's faction. The communication was carefully crafted to ensure that it was clear and diplomatic, aiming to open a dialogue that could lead to a peaceful resolution. Meanwhile, General Tarek, unaware of the developing negotiations, continued his assault, determined to break through the Phoenix's defenses. The conflict had reached a critical point, and the outcome was hanging in the balance. As the battle continued to rage, the possibility of a ceasefire introduced a new layer of complexity. The Phoenix's crew remained vigilant, prepared for any potential outcome while holding out hope for a resolution that could bring an end to the hostilities. The engagement between the Phoenix and the Goran fleet was reaching a climax, with both sides pushing their limits. The experimental countermeasures and tactical adjustments had given the Phoenix a significant edge, but the Goran forces, led by Tarek, were still fighting fiercely. The intercepted message from Admiral Lyra's faction offered a glimmer of hope for a peaceful resolution, but the outcome of the ongoing battle would determine the final course of events. As both sides continued their struggle, the fate of the conflict hung in the balance, with the possibility of a ceasefire offering a potential path to peace. Diplomacy or defiance? The tension on the Phoenix's command deck was palpable as Captain Skora prepared to engage with Admiral Lyra's faction. The intercepted message had opened a potential pathway to peace, but it was uncertain whether the Goran dissidents could exert enough influence to halt General Tarek's relentless assault. Lieutenant Quinn, establish a secure communication channel with Admiral Lyra, Skora instructed, his voice steady despite the mounting pressure. We need to ensure our offer of negotiation is clear and credible. Quinn nodded, her fingers dancing over the controls as she set up the communication link. The screen flickered to life, revealing Admiral Lyra, a stern yet weary-looking Goran officer who had clearly seen the toll of prolonged conflict. Her sharp eyes conveyed both determination and exhaustion. "This is Admiral Lyra," she said, her voice measured. "I understand you wish to discuss terms of a ceasefire. What guarantees can you offer that will ensure our faction's safety and the cessation of hostilities?" Skora took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Admiral Lyra, we propose an immediate ceasefire and a negotiated settlement to end the conflict. We are prepared to work with your faction to broker a lasting peace. Our priority is to prevent further casualties and destruction." Lyra's gaze remained steady. General Tarek is not an easy opponent to sway. His faction controls the majority of the fleet, and they have their own agenda. But we have grown weary of this endless battle. What assurances can you provide that this will be more than just a temporary pause in hostilities? Skora nodded, understanding the gravity of her concerns. "We can offer a temporary cessation of hostilities to allow for talks, and we will guarantee the safety of your faction during this period. Additionally, we can work towards a formal treaty that addresses the concerns of both sides." The conversation continued with Lyra's faction, demanding specific terms and guarantees. Skora and Admiral Vega worked diligently to address these demands while ensuring that any agreement would be fair and enforceable. The negotiation process was delicate, requiring careful negotiation and compromise to reach an agreement that would be acceptable to both sides. Meanwhile, General Tarek remained unaware of the ongoing negotiations. His focus was solely on the battle, pushing his forces to continue their assault on the Phoenix. The Goran fleet, despite suffering heavy losses, continued to press forward, driven by Tarek's unyielding determination. On the battlefield, the Phoenix's crew worked tirelessly to maintain their defensive and offensive capabilities. The experimental countermeasures were proving effective, but the Goran forces were adapting, making it clear that the conflict was far from over. As the negotiations with Admiral Lyra progressed, a ceasefire agreement began to take shape. The terms included an immediate halt to all offensive operations, the establishment of a demilitarized zone, and the initiation of formal peace talks to address the underlying issues of the conflict. Skora and Vega reviewed the proposed terms, ensuring that they were balanced and realistic. The agreement was drafted and presented to Admiral Lyra for review. Her faction was willing to move forward, but the final approval depended on whether Tarek would agree to the ceasefire. "We need to get this proposal to General Tarek," Skora said, turning to Vega. "If we can convince him to accept the ceasefire, we may have a chance to end this conflict before it escalates further." Vega nodded in agreement. "I'll prepare a transmission to Tarek. We need to be persuasive, but also prepared for the possibility that he may refuse." The transmission was carefully crafted to appeal to Tarek's sense of practicality and the dire situation faced by both sides. It emphasized the benefits of a ceasefire and the potential for a mutually beneficial resolution. As the transmission was sent, the Phoenix's crew braced for Tarek's response. The Goran general's reaction could determine whether the conflict would continue or come to an abrupt halt. General Tarek received the ceasefire proposal with a mixture of suspicion and frustration. He had been determined to crush the Phoenix's resistance and secure a decisive victory. The idea of negotiating a ceasefire seemed like anathema to his aggressive strategy. "What is this?" Tarek growled as he read the transmission. "A proposal for peace. This is an attempt to undermine our efforts." Despite his anger, Tarek knew that continuing the battle indefinitely was not a sustainable strategy. His forces were already stretched thin, and the Goran fleet was suffering significant losses. He reluctantly began to consider the possibility of negotiating a ceasefire. "I will review these terms," Tarek finally said, his tone begrudging. "But know this. Any agreement must ensure that we are not left at a disadvantage. I will not surrender to these humans without guarantees." With Tarek's grudging acceptance, the ceasefire was set into motion. Both sides began to implement the terms, and the battle that had raged so fiercely was replaced by a tentative peace. The Phoenix's crew and the Goran factions prepared for the upcoming peace talks, hoping that the agreements made would lead to a lasting resolution. The conflict had reached a critical juncture, and the potential for a peaceful resolution was now within reach. The outcome of the negotiations would determine the future of the relationship between humans and Goran, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The dawn of peace. The atmosphere in the conference room was tense as the representatives of the Phoenix and the Goran factions gathered to finalize the terms of the ceasefire. The room was a stark contrast to the battlefield, a serene environment designed to foster diplomacy and compromise. Captain Skora and Admiral Lyra, along with General Tarek and his closest advisors, were present, each side bringing their own perspectives to the table. Captain Skora, feeling the weight of responsibility, addressed the gathered leaders. "Thank you all for coming to this crucial meeting. We are here to finalize the ceasefire agreement and lay the groundwork for a lasting peace. The negotiations have been challenging, but we are now at a pivotal moment. It's essential that we reach a fair and enforceable agreement." General Tarek, his stern face showing signs of fatigue, stared intently at the document in front of him. "I hope this agreement will be more than just words. We need tangible assurances that both sides will adhere to the terms. The sacrifices we've made on the battlefield should not be in vain." Admiral Lyra, standing beside Tarek, nodded in agreement. "The terms we've discussed are a starting point. We must ensure that any peace agreement addresses the underlying issues that led to this conflict. Without a clear and equitable resolution, we risk returning to hostilities." Skora reviewed the proposed terms once more, ensuring that they addressed the concerns raised by both sides. The ceasefire agreement included provisions for the withdrawal of forces from contested areas, the establishment of a demilitarized zone, and a creation of a joint committee to oversee the implementation of the agreement. Additionally, there were provisions for humanitarian aid and the rebuilding of affected regions. As the meeting progressed, the leaders debated various clauses of the agreement, seeking common ground on contentious issues. Tarek, despite his initial reluctance, began to see the benefits of a formal resolution. The proposal for a joint committee was particularly appealing, as it promised a neutral platform for addressing disputes and fostering cooperation. "This committee," Tarek said, "must have the authority to enforce the terms of the agreement. We cannot afford any ambiguity in its mandate. If we are to avoid further conflict, there must be a clear mechanism for resolving issues that arise." Skora nodded, acknowledging the concern. "The committee will have the authority to make binding decisions and mediate disputes. We will also establish regular meetings to ensure that both sides remain committed to the agreement." As the leaders continued their discussions, the tone of the meeting shifted from one of suspicion to cautious optimism. The representatives of both sides began to envision a future where peace was not just a fleeting hope, but a tangible reality. The possibility of collaboration and mutual respect started to replace the bitterness of conflict. The final draft of the ceasefire agreement was presented and reviewed. It was a comprehensive document that addressed the major concerns of both sides, and it included specific timelines for the withdrawal of forces and the implementation of various provisions. After careful consideration and several rounds of negotiation, the leaders were ready to sign the agreement. With a sense of formality, Captain Skora and Admiral Lyra took their places at the signing table. General Tarek and his advisors watched with a mix of skepticism and hope. The act of signing the agreement marked the end of hostilities and the beginning of a new chapter in the relationship between humans and Gorans. As the signatures were affixed to the document, a collective sense of relief and accomplishment filled the room. The ceasefire was officially in effect, and both sides began to implement the terms of the agreement. The atmosphere in the conference room was one of cautious optimism, as the leaders prepared to embark on a new era of diplomacy and cooperation. In the aftermath of the signing, both the Phoenix and the Goran factions worked diligently to uphold the terms of the ceasefire. The demilitarized zone was established, and the Joint Committee was formed to oversee the implementation of the agreement. Humanitarian aid began flowing into the affected regions, providing much-needed relief to those impacted by the conflict. The ceasefire marked a significant turning point in the relationship between humans and Gorans. The once hostile factions were now engaged in a process of reconciliation and rebuilding. The lessons learned from the conflict and the negotiations would shape the future interactions between the two sides, fostering a spirit of cooperation and understanding. Captain Skora and Admiral Lyra, along with General Tarek and his advisors, continued to work together to address the challenges that lay ahead. The road to lasting peace would be filled with obstacles, but the commitment to resolving disputes and building a better future was unwavering. As the galaxy moved forward from the shadow of conflict, the story of the Phoenix and the Goran factions became a testament to the power of diplomacy and the resilience of the human spirit. The ceasefire was more than just a pause in hostilities. It was a chance to build a new foundation for peace and cooperation in the galaxy. The future remained uncertain, but the commitment to peace and the shared vision of a better tomorrow offered hope for a brighter, more harmonious existence among the stars.